My name is Jewel Matheson. I'm one of the founding members of Sonoma Patient Group. We're the longest operating dispensary in Santa Rosa. We've been there for over a decade. Sonoma Patient Group prides ourselves in educating our community. We've been a medical dispensary for over a decade, and now with the new laws changing, we're now open to recreational and adult use consumers. Today, we've invited Dr. Hulter to talk about cannabis and just why is it so effective for the human body. So, Dr. Hulter.
Thanks, Jewel, for having me on. I am a board-certified anesthesiologist for 40 years, and I've worked a lot with pain. Now I've been working with marijuana this is my 8th year, and I've seen over 15,000 patients. I think if I wasn't a believer at the beginning, the stories I have learned, what I've seen, is what I like to share. And my forte is the practical use of marijuana. The everyday, what do I do with this stuff? That's what I'm trying to get across. The basics, understanding how marijuana works and how it can work in your life.
Oftentimes we have people come into the dispensary that don't want to get high, but they do want pain relief. Dr. Hulter, can you talk about the difference between THC and CBD?
I think in order to understand the difference, it's good to start at the very beginning. There are two main compounds in marijuana. THC is the one we've all heard about forever, and CBD is the one we're all hearing about all the time now because it's the modern thing to talk about. The THC is the only molecule that was cared about for the last hundreds of years, and that's because of the psychoactive head trip potential. What is important to know in that regard is that heat becomes very important. The THC molecule is a perfectly wonderful, healthful, anti-cancer, good molecule that won't make you high unless it is heated. The molecule has to be activated, and in chemistry terms, that means that molecule has to change shape so that it fits into a receptor. Once the THC is heated, it now fits into the receptor in the brain that makes you high. So if you look at the history of its use in this way, it's always heated. It's either smoked or baked or cooked or hot oiled or hot tea, always hot. That was to get the active head trip from the THC. But it turns out the rest of the molecule that doesn't get activated is still a wonderful, healthful, anti-cancer kind of molecule that I don't want to impugn in any way. It can make you high, but what doesn't make you high is still very important to what marijuana is and what it does.
So cannabidiol, the miracle molecule, can you talk more about why the CBD is so effective?
Well, we come back to the point that the scientists were not allowed to look at this cannabis product of any kind in the microscope, in the laboratories, to find out anything about it because of political constraints until about 8 years ago. At that time, with two main compounds in marijuana and a list a mile long of the things that marijuana is treating, the scientists felt compelled to figure out, well, I wonder which molecule is doing what. And that was the big surprise. This is what revolutionized medicinal marijuana, because I think the scientists fully expected that the CBDs were going to be, that THC was going to be king of the road and going to be responsible for doing everything that marijuana does. But instead, the studies showed that CBDs did way more than THC. Completely threw the scientific world into a tizzy about how that could be. It was as if the CBDs are the worker bees of marijuana. They were everywhere doing everything. And because of this, the scientists were expected to come up with a lot of information about the CBD molecule, and they knew nothing about it. So, at that time, they started looking at these kinds of things. Number one, CBDs do not require any kind of activation in order to do what they do. When the CBDs hit your bloodstream, boom, they go. Where do they go? We have a picture in our office of a cannabis man, an anatomical, picture of a man, and it's the reminder that we have receptors for marijuana, for cannabis, in every single organ system in our body. Not only is that the case, but it has been proven by cellular and molecular biology that CBDs are tissue specific. Think about that for a minute. It means you have lung CBDs, you have muscle CBDs. You can't touch anywhere on your body a spot that doesn't have cannabis receptors, because every cell in your body is in an organ system, and every organ system has receptors for cannabinoid molecules. So, with CBDs being so important, and all of a sudden doing everything, the jewel then was, oh my God, it's a pain reliever, complete pain reliever, and the crowning glory was no psychoactive effects. And this was unbelievable news 8 years ago. Unbelievable news, and it happened just at a time when I personally was getting into trying to treat pain, and this was the ideal situation to be able to get pain relief or whatever you need from marijuana and not have to be high or have any psychoactive effects of any kind at all.
I've been in the industry for over a decade, 11 years. And when we first started, it was indica sativa. We didn't know anything about the CBDs and all the amazing effects that it's had. And you're right, it's revolutionized the industry. Mm-hmm. We have seniors are our growing population now because insomnia, pain, all those things we acquire as we age, cannabis is so beneficial for.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit more about the endocannabinoid system?
The endocannabinoid system is an amazing system in our central nervous system, excuse me, that was not even discovered until approximately 1990. At that time, the system was found to synthesize cannabinoid molecules, just like THC and CBD. And I think this had a lot to do with the fact that this finding of this new system was not spread through the medical world very quickly, because there was no way for the government to explain that a system in the brain made marijuana molecules. At any rate, this system is something that we would have read about in grade school from day one, because you always hear about the pituitary gland being the master gland. But this is the master organ system, and I mean that sincerely. It is in charge of all other organ systems and making certain that they are working perfectly, efficiently, and smoothly. I really believe it has a lot to do with the fact that diseases involving the nervous system are so completely amenable to cannabis treatment is because the endocannabinoid system is as if the supervisor is in the same system as all of these neurologic diseases. And I believe it has to set a good example of keeping everything normal and normalized and modulated and perfected. And for years I would say to people, marijuana, cannabis is wonderful for pain. And then it would always say, especially nerve pain. And now and then a patient would say, why is it especially good for nerve pain? I'd say, well, probably more receptors. I didn't know what else to say. Now I know the reason it's so good for nerve pain is that the endocannabinoid system, with all of its molecules that are identical to our cannabis that we use medicinally, they're all going to the same places to fix everything and to modulate it and to anti-inflame it. And the endocannabinoid system as a whole is in charge of very nebulous things like pain, mood, appetite, sense of well-being, things of that nature. And it actually synthesizes endocannabinoids, which are considered neurotransmitters in the brain, that would be listed along with serotonin and dopamine and things like that. But you can see how the system is so a part of every part of you, because if it's part of the central nervous system, it's part of the spinal cord, and it's part of every nerve in your body. That's why cannabis treatment is so effective for a disease like fibromyalgia. I'll use that example because in my understanding of fibromyalgia, every nerve in the body is on fire. Every nerve.
So Dr. Hulter, we're in the middle of an opioid crisis, and we now know that cannabis can be useful for opioid addiction. Can you talk a little bit about the opioid receptors and the cannabis receptors? I'm not sure I understand it fully.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I think it's very reassuring when we stop to look at the nature of where the receptors are for these two kinds of medicines. It turns out they're totally separate systems. They don't interconnect in any way. That's why the cannabinoid answer to the pain treatment that the opioids used to do, it makes so much sense that that can happen with safety. No one has ever died of a marijuana overdose. We happen to know that's because there are no receptors in the brainstem for cannabis. Even though they're everywhere else in the body, the only spot is in the brainstem. Therefore, one can't overdose because cardiovascular control, respiratory control, everything cooks along just normally until that person wakes up.
Cannabis has kind of grown up in the last decade that I've been dealing with patients. Can you talk a little bit about the different modes of medication?
I think to keep it less than overwhelming, you can divide it into 4 basic ways to use marijuana. First of all, the most common way that everybody's aware of is smoking, and now the more modern way of vaping, which has its advantages. The edibles are wonderful for people who want to be sleepy at night and have a nice wake up in the morning, as long as one understands how to use it. It's the answer to sleepless nights for sure. The 2 more modern ways to use marijuana are the tinctures and the topicals. As to what is a tincture, a tincture is a liquid that has been designed with dilution techniques so you can overwhelm the number of THC molecules with CBD molecules. Because of that, tinctures are sold according to ratios, which doesn't make a lot of sense unless you understand that a 20-to-1 tincture means 20 molecules of CBD for every 1 little molecule of THC. So if you can overwhelm the number of molecules, you can get the CBD effect. But it does depend on the ratio. And the main cutoff point would be 8-to-1. Anything stronger than 8-to-1, that's CBD to THC, is pretty much guaranteed no psychoactive effect. And that's the medicinal part that people are looking for, to be awake during the day, but get everything they need from the marijuana, from the cannabis. The topicals are ridiculously effective. And I say that because I hear crazy things,
You
and
know,
you're saying it also.
I have rheumatoid arthritis, and it's one of the only things that work for my injuries, my arthritis. There are miracle salve. I just talk
Well,
more
and
about
this is
the
what I
science of
hear
that.
all the time, to the point where I've had to really give it a lot of thought as to how could this stuff work so well that people are so impressed. And I think I figured it out. When you put cannabis cream of any kind, salve, whatever, on your skin, it's going to move through the skin to the muscle or the joint or whatever you're trying to send it through to. But if there are receptors in every system along the way, when you put the cannabis cream on there, it melts into the skin because of the fat solubility. And it literally continues to just ooze through your tissues like a sponge would take up water. Now, the way I first figured this out was when I had young women telling me that they were using cannabis cream on the abdomen for menstrual pain. At first I thought they were kind of pulling my leg because cannabis has always been helpful for menstrual cramps. But as a cream on the abdomen, but it works, I was told by many, many patients now. At the same time, I started noticing ads for cannabis-infused tampons for severe menstrual pain, which would be very important to certain patients with endometriosis, for instance. And then the big thing I learned from that, and I think it's so important to realize how it goes wherever you start it, the cannabis treatment, it begins to move, and it moves right through your tissues. And because of that, it explains a lot about why the rectal suppositories are starting to be the answer to cancer patients with pelvic floor neuropathies from chemotherapy and all kinds of terrible things. It's like, how can you get enough drug into the patient without the head trip, and rectally or any of these other topical ways are not associated with any head trip at all. So huge doses of the cannabis can be given to a cancer patient without having to suffer the head trip from it. And all this has to do with the fat solubility of the molecules just marching through your tissues.
There's so many different facets to the cannabis question, and I really appreciate you coming in and giving your expertise today on behalf of Sonoma Patient Group. You've been a wealth of information. I want to just let you know that you can find all Dr. Hulter's contact information down below in the links. And if you have any questions for us, Sonoma Patient Group, or Dr. Hulter, leave them in the boxes below.
Well, thanks for having me. I do specialize in personalized treatment as far as reaching out to seniors who have multiple problems in multiple systems and trying to make medicinal cannabis work for you in an everyday kind of way. And I can help you do that. So come and see me.